One of the most blatant displays of racism in the 1930s was the trial of the Scottsboro Boys. On March 25, 1931, 9 black boys between the ages of 13 and 19 were riding on a train destined for Memphis, Tennessee. The boys were Eugene Williams, Roy Wright, Andy Wright, Charlie Weems, Clarence Norris, Haywood Patterson, Olin Montgomery, Willie Robertson, and Ozzie Powell. While traveling through Alabama, a fight between the group and a few white boys sparked. By the time the train arrived in Paint Rock, Alabama, the white boys had alerted the police that the group had assaulted them. On the same train, there were 2 young women, Victoria Price and Ruby Bates. When questioned by police and afraid they would learn the women were unable to pay the train fare, Price and Bates accused the Scottsboro Boys of rape. Without adequate proof of the crime, the police imprisoned the young men at Scottsboro Jail. The blatant discrimination continued as the boys were denied the chance to call home and given only an hour to consult with their attorneys. All 9 boys were represented by Milo C. Moody and Stephen R. Roddy. The latter was a real estate attorney, and the former hadn't tried a case in years. Norris and Weems were first on trial on April 6. The prosecution's strategy was to rely primarily on the testimony of Price. Price, despite being the alleged victim, was reported to making wisecracks that the whole courtroom was often in a roar of laughter. After Price, Bates took the stand and was unable to identify any of the boys as her attackers. There were also irregularities in the women's testimonies, such as whether or not they had spoken to a group of white boys on the train. Next, 2 doctors who had examined the young women testified that they found no evidence of rape. Toward the end of the trial, Norris, one of the accused boys, took the stand. He shockingly confessed that each of the boys, excluding himself, had raped Bates and Price. When asked after the trial why he lied about the rape, he explained the prison guards had told him that if the boys didn't confess, they would turn them over to the mob waiting outside the courtroom. Weems and Norris were found guilty and sentenced to death while Patterson's trial began. The jury found Patterson guilty and sentenced him to death after only 25 minutes of deliberation. All of the other boys were found guilty and sentenced to death, except for Roy Wright, who was only 13. Wright was found guilty, but his trial resulted in a hung jury because whether he should face the death penalty or life in prison couldn't be decided upon. The remaining 8 boys were set to be executed on July 10th until the International Labor Defense decided to represent the boys' appeals cases.
Immediately after the initial trial, progressive groups such as the NAACP, ACLU, and International Labor Defense came to the defense of the boys, citing a lack of evidence, a rushed trial, and evaluation of the court records as proof that this trial was more akin to a lynching than a legal prosecution. With this support, the public's opinion began to shift, especially as more information was released. Numerous appeals and retrials occurred in front of all-white juries beginning in January of 1932. In a drastic turn of events, a letter from Bates was presented to the court in which he denies ever being raped. In spite of this, Alabama Supreme Court upheld the conviction for all the boys except Eugene Williams, as he was a juvenile at the time. Later that year, the monumental Supreme Court case of Powell v. Alabama was heard, in which the Supreme Court ruled that the boys had not received a reasonable opportunity to secure counsel and therefore were denied it. This ruling temporarily protected the boys from their initial death sentences, as all their cases were able to be appealed. However, little success was had, and as early as spring of 1933, Haywood Patterson was once again sentenced to death by electric chair. This was even following another reversal testimony provided by Bates in this retrial, in which she testified that neither she or Price were raped by the boys. Similar retrials followed for the other boys, with all verdicts handed down by all-white juries. This evidently became a major issue, and the Supreme Court heard yet again another case regarding the Scottsboro 9 in 1935, Norris v. Alabama. In their ruling, the court declared that by intentionally preventing African Americans from being a part of the jury, the defendants were denied the right to equal protection. Similarly to the Powell v. Alabama case, another wave of retrials occurred after this decision. Ultimately, all the boys would survive their initial death sentences and be released from their subsequent prison sentences, but not without immense hardship throughout the rest of their lives. Notably, only one of the boys received another death sentence, with 4 receiving heinously long sentences and the remaining 4 having their rape charges dropped. Despite not facing death, the immense hardships these young men encountered resulted in a lifetime of agony and was truly indicative of the racist system which still has remnants today. Through the 2 Supreme Court rulings, the Scottsboro defendants' struggles helped advance the civil rights of all Americans.
The Supreme Court decisions made during the Scottsboro Boys cases would prove useful in later cases. Powell v. Alabama was cited in the Gideon v. Wainwright case of 1963, when a Florida man requested counsel and was refused and ultimately charged and convicted with felony breaking and entering. In the case, Powell v. Alabama was extended to allow the right to counsel for all felony defendants. The Norris v. Alabama Supreme Court decision is most significant in that it would lead to the end of racial discrimination in juries. Following the trials of the boys, there was a movement of Americans of all races who desired to challenge early American presumptions about African Americans. Peaceful protests were conducted as well as shows of civil disobedience to combat Jim Crow laws of the time. With this movement came lawful reform. Though lawful reform did take place, the stereotypes surrounding African Americans, especially males, caused cases like the Scottsboro Boys to continue. While the Boys case is widely known as one of the most notorious racial hoaxes in American history, cases very similar to it continued to happen. In his article, The Central Park 5, Scottsboro Boys and Myth of the Bestial Black Man, Professor N. Jeremy DeRue describes these stereotypes surrounding black males in America. He describes that since the dawn of America, the black male has been regarded as animalistic and bestial, therefore making him inherently criminal and violent. As this image is passed down through generations, its effects are shown through cases like the Scottsboro Boys, Emmett Tills, and the Central Park Fives. In the case of the Central Park Five, a group of 4 African American boys and 1 Latino aged 4 through 16 were falsely accused, tried, and convicted of raping a white woman in Central Park 58 years after the Scottsboro Boys case. The 5 were described as a wolf pack and 2-legged animals by the media. The use of these words to describe the boys created an image of savagery and similarly tainted the boys in the Scottsboro cases during their 1930s trials. So while the Scottsboro Boys trial did spark legal reform and inspired change, the problem that caused the boys to be accused in the first place is one that still persists, and in order to combat such injustices as the ones seen in the cases of the Scottsboro Boys, Emmett Till, and the Central Park Five, these deep-rooted stereotypes must be recognized and countered.